Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ethics class. And we're continuing our discussion now of the ontology of a classical realist or natural law ethic. And we left off last time having finished letter D, which means we're starting with E. Essential properties are possible and are found only in the nature of particular individuals. There are 7 points left for us to consider in this discussion of the ontology of ethics, and you'll notice that each of the final 7 points begins with the words essential properties. So we start off in a way in E with 2 sentences kind of combined. Essential properties are possible, and essential properties are found only in the natures of particular individuals. Now, essential properties are what make something what it is. In the case of the human being, our essential properties are what make us what we are. In the case of a non-human animal, likewise. In the case of a plant, likewise. The essential properties are what make a particular plant, as we'll later use the example here of a tulip. It's what makes a tulip what a tulip is. Now you might wonder, well, of course that's what things are, and why would anybody say anything that would make it necessary to make the statement that essential properties are possible? Well, if we think about the underlying philosophy of voluntarism, which I know I've mentioned this name to you several times, called nominalism, the idea is that essences and natures are merely human creations. Essences and natures are created by individual human beings, usually as they are grouped in societies. So what a human being is or what something else is for a particular group of people could be different than what that thing, whether it be human being, animal, or plant, or whatever, is for a different group of people. So the idea that essential properties are possible has been challenged. Classical realism and the natural law assert that they have to be possible. Otherwise, we don't have the foundation, ultimately, for ethical guidelines. Secondly, the second part of the sentence, essential properties are found only in the natures of particular individuals. Classical realism, as we're looking at it here in terms of the foundation of ethics, is essentially Aristotelian, which means that while it is in many ways similar to what Plato is saying, that there is a reality, that there is a nature, there is a what is, it's not as though the claim is being made that these essences or natures somehow exist off in a world of their own, as Plato proposed, a non-temporal, non-spatial, non-physical sort of existence. Aristotle, although on the other hand didn't want to go to the nominalist extreme and say that essences are merely names or labels. So it has to be somewhere in the middle. There is a way in which an essence or a nature exists mentally, you might say, in a universal sense, in the sense that we have an idea or a concept in our minds. But really, essential properties, insofar as making something what it is, only exists in the individual that is that, and that is an individuated instance of that essence. So there's an underlying sort of philosophical controversy underlying this. Philosophical controversies aren't real exciting. They don't have seemingly immediate political ramifications, although they do. They're not the kind of controversies that are going to make for, sensational magazine articles or the evening news or what have you. But as I've mentioned to you before, it's very true, as someone said, that ideas have consequences. And what we're seeing here is we have two theories, one of which relies upon the idea of essence and nature, and another which is essentially reliant upon individual desires and wants and the ability to put those wants and desires into action. If you look at E5, right, you can see that what something is, as something exists in the world in time, what we call a temporal essence, is a combination of a material element and a formal element. So again, think for a moment of the human being. We have a body, and we have something, as long as we're alive, that animates that body. So there's a part of us which is material or physical or bodily, and there's a part of us which is not material and not physical and not bodily. That's what we call the formal element. And that is the element that essentially makes us what we are. We grow. Anything that's a substantial form, that's animated, that's alive, grows under normal conditions. Right? So we're not the same in a lot of ways as we were when we were 3 years old. But then again, we are the same. And that's sort of the puzzle of the human reality. How is it that we are the same at the very beginning of our existence and at the very end of our existence, and we've undergone all these changes from getting from the beginning to the end? So that's a very important characteristic of a substantial form. Something alive, it grows, it develops. To think about that, compare a tulip and a triangle, right? So a tulip, right now they may just be starting to pop up, right? So it's been dormant. The tulip has been dormant in the ground. It's been the bulb. And while we wouldn't say that there's a tulip flower there still is tulip, right? If you want a tulip to grow, you're going to have to plant a tulip bulb. So the essence of tulip is present in the tulip bulb. On the other hand, if you look at a triangle, it has been what it has been and is now forever, right? Triangles don't develop, they don't grow, they don't go dormant, they don't flower and bloom, they just are. They don't necessarily depend on time, they don't depend on anything physical, they don't really depend upon anybody knowing them, and they don't know whether or not anybody knows them, because they're not conscious beings. Triangles just are, right? So that's an interesting way to sort of compare the point that's being made there in letter E. The next point, the second of these sentences, which begin with the words essential properties, is a crucial one for understanding the foundation of a classical realist ethic. Essential properties are fundamentally dispositional. And what do we mean when we say we have a disposition towards something? We have a tendency, we have a proclivity, we have a likelihood of a desire arising perhaps within us, right? A disposition is sort of a built-in inclination toward the accomplishment of a purpose. The built-in inclination of trying to accomplish a goal, or as you see the word here, end. End here doesn't mean a termination. End means a goal or a purpose. So a disposition is something that is not at all times actualized, right? And if again, we look at ourselves, we see that we have actualized in different ways over the course of our lives. But even when we first began our existence, it could be said, for example, that we had a disposition for knowledge or a disposition for friendship. We didn't know anything when our existence first began. We didn't do anything. We didn't have any friends. But the disposition, the tendency toward that purpose or that goal was still there. And so if we look at what is, not just in terms of ourselves, although that's obviously what our focus is because that's what ethics concerns, if we look at what is in the world at large, we see potency and we see act. All right? So we see the goal, which is the act, the actualization, and we see potency, and that's represented by the disposition. So there's always that coming into being, that more fully actualizing of being. Remember, you sort of might recall Aristotle's definition of happiness, eudaimonia, a whole life well lived, which really doesn't necessarily take place at any one point in time. At no point are you going to say, well, now my life is whole, it's been well lived. We don't know when our lives will be whole, right? So when we look at a living thing, whether it's a tulip or a cat or a human being, we find that these goals or these purposes are somehow built in to what we are essentially. They're not something that's added on. They're not something that someone has thought up. They're not something that someone has imposed, right? The end or the goal or the purpose constitutes what the nature is of the thing which is alive and growing and developing over a course of a period of time. You could say, as it says in number 9, what would this be here? F9, an essence is a supreme set of dispositional properties. Right? So dispositions, as it says here, sort of are bound up in nature. They're not something that come about by virtue of what we want. Our wants, as we can see, either will work in accord with or contrary to our dispositions. We're disposed to knowledge, for example. We're disposed to learn. We don't always want to gain knowledge. We don't always want to learn. We faced, or just this situation that we're in right now with this transition to online learning has placed new challenges on our desires because we're not just able to walk into the classroom. I'm not just able to walk into the classroom and start teaching. You're not just able to walk into the classroom and sit down and start listening. Now we have to do things a little bit differently. The time schedule doesn't have to be exactly the same. I'm sure that while maybe some of you are sitting down at 10 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday and doing ethics, it's probably not the case that most of you are. Certainly not practical for me to do that at that exact time because we're not doing this, as the term goes, in a synchronous way. We're not doing it contemporaneously with the time of the class. So we have to work with our wants and the dispositions. I use the example there of sex versus gender. Sex is, in this classical realist viewpoint, a binary reality. A human being is either a male or a female. All of the other names which are given in the classical realist viewpoint don't really have any foundation in nature. The idea that some propose that sex is somehow assigned is nonsensical in terms of classical realism. It just simply is what it is. Now, you can look around and say, gee, I wish I wasn't a male or I wish I wasn't a female. But as the old saying goes, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride, right? Well, certain things we can change by means of our wishes. Certain things we can't change by means of our wishes. So the other point that, with regard to F, that needs to be made is point number 11. An essence is present throughout the entire existence of the thing under consideration. So whether we're talking about an oak tree or a human person, the essence is present at the beginning. You know, that acorn is oak, right? It's not beech or walnut. It is oak. That's its essence. No, it's not an oak tree, right? But just like with a human being, when do we say that the oak tree is completely and perfectly developed? That point is it's hard to pin down. If we could pin it down, and we certainly can't pin that down in our own lives. Are you, at your age and stage, completely developed? Am I, or is it somebody in between, or is it older or younger than us? Right? So what we're focused on are not those changing characteristics, but what we're trying to focus on are the essential characteristics. What makes something what it is? And that essence is present at the beginning of a thing's existence. Now that takes us only into two of the points, so we're going to have to, ladies and gentlemen, speed things up a little. We will begin in the next video, we will begin with G. That will be Monday's class, and that will finish this consideration of the ontology of ethics.